Have you ever thought about how we came to associate the beep of a dying fire alarm with being broke? My name is Drew. I'm a sociologist, and sociology is the study of society and human behavior in social contexts.
So I genuinely did not think that I would be making a video on this topic because I never would have imagined that there's actually a genre of videos on the internet.com that seek to explain the smoke detector phenomenon as a response to trauma that I guess black and poor people, according to this sociology student slash professor, I don't know what his position is, we'll just call him a sociologist, is using for the explanation. But here we are right now at this moment looking at a TikTok on the internet.com of a guy trying to make the case that the smoke detector chirp that you are hearing in a bunch of different people's households in all these various interviews that we talked about over the past recent weeks or even going further back on this particular channel is actually the result of trauma, something that has negatively impacted their prefrontal cortex. Again, his words, not mine.
And today I want to talk about the prefrontal cortex. Now, in order to identify the relationship between beeping fire alarms, being broke, and the prefrontal cortex, we need to understand what the prefrontal cortex is. And I think the easiest way to describe it is the part of the brain that evolved to make all of the stimuli that you're receiving as you go through life into something cohesive.
And this has to be genuinely one of the most asinine things I've ever heard in my entire life, and yet it is actually being presented seriously and legitimately without any sense of irony as an explanation for black people disproportionately not getting a 9-volt battery and changing out their smoke detector when it starts to chirp. And this is what we're going to talk about today, because apparently instead of telling people to change their battery, you need to explain why it's actually the result of trauma that they experience through their lives, and you can't actually judge that trauma, because I guess it's better to have black people in a home with non-working smoke detectors that will burn out, or maybe they'll die from carbon monoxide, than ever criticize something that is going on in that community disproportionately. And this is what we're going to talk about today. This is what we're going to discuss. But before we get into that, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
So using the dying fire alarm as the example, you hear the beep, you register what that means. It means that the batteries are dying. You get a stool, you put the stool against the wall, you climb up on the stool, you twist the fire alarm, and you take it down from off the wall. You inspect it, you see what kind of batteries it needs. You go to your drawer to see if you have those batteries. If you don't have those batteries, you make a point to go to the store that day. You go and get the batteries, you come in, you swap them out, you climb back up on the stool, you put it on the wall, you twist it in, and there you've done it, you've replaced your fire alarm. Or perhaps you live in an apartment and you don't have the money to buy the batteries, so you contact your landlord and you tell them, hey, I need you to switch out the batteries on my fire alarm. Either way, you've identified a task, you've initiated the task, you followed through on the task, and you have completed the task. That is what's supposed to happen when your prefrontal cortex is functioning exactly as it is supposed to, completely unaccosted, and everything's fine.
Yeah, honestly, when I see this particular TikTok video and I see this guy explaining about the trauma and potential generational trauma that leads to certain black Americans not getting a 9-volt battery and changing out their smoke detector, my first reaction is to roll the Anna Kasparian clip that says, we're not doing this.
Because even if you understand the stimuli of the consequences, what you need to do, when you need to do it, and when you need to be there, if the prefrontal cortex is not firing the way it's supposed to, it's just not firing. And no amount of yelling or frustration or cutting people off is going to change that. And that's why we have to give these diagnoses so that we can understand them as these specialized circumstances that they are. But ADHD isn't the only thing that dysregulates the prefrontal cortex. There are a lot of biopsychosocial phenomena that correspond with the dysregulation of the prefrontal cortex or other parts of the brain, like anxiety and depression, but also acute and chronic stress and trauma.
No, we're not doing that. That's embarrassing.
And the reason why is because this is completely and utterly embarrassing. Because the fact of the matter is, this guy is trying to make the case that black victimization is actually the cause societally for why you hear this chirp. And again, he's not necessarily racializing it. He's also saying that it's a consequence of poverty. But in reality and actuality, when your home is burning down and your smoke detector's not going off because you let it chirp for 4 months before the battery died, blaming evil evil white racism doesn't help anyone. Actually, what ends up happening when you do that is your family dies of carbon monoxide, or they die from the fire. People actually die from the smoke inhalation. And yeah, that is not a good response to have to these people putting themselves in danger. And I much prefer the very many instances that we see on the internet.com of another black person most of the time saying, hey, we got to break the stereotype. You need to shut that off. What is going on here? This is ridiculous. And then you find out that more times than not, the person who has the chirping going on in their home doesn't even hear it anymore.
First of all, you're definitely a single woman because
Yes.
you got the single woman tell. That damn smoke detector.
Mm-hmm.
How do you live with that?
The way that I've been living with just being a single woman is
No. Specifically, the smoke detector that keeps chirping. How do you live with that?
Can you just elaborate more on like what do you mean by the smoke?
It keeps going beep.
Like red flags?
That smoke detector that's beeping in the background. There's a smoke detector. It beeps every 30 seconds and it goes beep.
I don't hear anything beeping. Did you just hear it again? Because I don't hear anything.
Wait for it. Told you guys they don't hear it after a while. There it was.
For some reason, this explanation, maybe a campaign, an awareness campaign, or something of the sort, is not good enough for Mr. Drew Silva, the sociologist right here, because he wants to explain how actually the chirp correlates to having ADHD and oppressive diagnoses based on the fact that there's trauma, and guess what? You can't actually judge people's trauma and how they respond to it, which I would respond, yes, you absolutely can. We definitely need to judge people's trauma. We need to judge people and their poverty, because in reality and actuality, I need you guys to understand this 100%. The same thing that makes people make poor financial decisions so they do not advance economically is likely what is leading them to ignore the smoke detector chirp, which is a lack of long-term thinking and long-term planning. Again, there are all sorts of experiments and tests and whatnot that show you that kids who do better in school, like they do the little marshmallow thing where they say, hey, you could eat the marshmallow now, or you could wait 30 minutes and then you'll get 3 marshmallows. The ones who wait, delay gratification, end up doing better in school and end up doing better throughout the course of life, because guess what? Delayed gratification is a skill that you absolutely 100% should have, and if you don't have it, you should develop it, because not having it leads to ridiculous and absurd results. And by the way, we see that on display in the very same interviews where they try to tell us that a person is a victim of society, while simultaneously we're hearing those chirps.
And those are the ones that I kind of want to focus on, especially because the definitions of stress and trauma and what constitutes something that is stressful or traumatic isn't really up to you or somebody else. So this idea that someone can say, well, you shouldn't really be experiencing stress, or you don't really have an excuse because what happened to you wasn't that bad. So what, your parents yelled at you, or so what, your parents got a divorce. I know people who've been through worse. I've been through worse. They don't really determine what constitutes something that is acutely traumatic or stressful. What does is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis and the sympathoadrenal medullary axis.
So no, I'm not going to be impressed by this guy's sociological dissertation on why the chirp is actually okay and why it's actually indicative of trauma, because in reality, the trauma very often is self-inflicted. I mean, think about the recent videos that we've done on this channel where the smoke detector chirp was present. The most recent one was from More Perfect Union. And remember, the whole premise of that video was that this left-wing YouTube channel was trying to convince us that this woman was victimized by a credit scheme, by a credit scam, because they gave her really unfavorable terms on an auto loan. And while it was true, she had genuinely bad terms, as the purchase price of the vehicle was like $24,000 after her $2,000 down payment, and she ended up with an interest rate of 20.49% over the course of 66 months, making her payment nearly $700 a month, which, by the way, she ended up responding to by getting a second job in order to pay for her car that she bought to get to her first job. Again, an absolutely stupid choice. But this woman, as we pointed out on this particular channel when we were reviewing this, could look at the terms of the contract for herself because they were right in front of her. They showed them to us and see that she would have to pay $20,000 in financing costs for a Dodge Durango from 2014 with 76,000 miles on it. Obviously, this was a bad and terrible deal and a perfect example of her lack of foresight. Again, watch that whole video. It'll be linked in the description. Was the fact that she didn't look up the Kelley Blue Book value until well after the fact, until after she totaled the car to see the amount of money that she was going to get in a payoff after she totaled the car.
The brakes failed. The car was totaled. In the aftermath, she discovered something shocking.
I Kelley Blue Booked it, and it told me that the Durango that I had at the time, at the price value was $6,000 to $13,000.
Again, this woman took out a car note that Dave Ramsey and Caleb Hammer would collectively have a stroke over, but the thing that really stuck out to me throughout the course of that particular video was the fact that when More Perfect Union went to her home and they conducted an interview with her, you could hear the smoke detector chirps. And in fact, you could hear 3 of them because they typically chirp in 30-second or 60-second intervals, and you could actually pick them up again at different volumes during the course of the interview, and this was under a minute and under a 30-second time period. So what you were actually hearing were 3 separate detectors going off. Again, let me play that for you right here.
Credit Acceptance started calling her and her grandmother, who'd been required to co-sign the loan.
My grandma just got to the point where she answered it. Oh, you owe $28,000 on the car, but we willing to drop it down to $5,000. And now here it is, she paying $100 a month. Still to this day. Every, I think, 5th of the month, they take $100 out of her account for it.
So while this guy is claiming trauma that's so devastating it affects their prefrontal cortex, I'm going to say that lack of intelligence is responsible for each and every one of the factors that we saw right here in this particular scenario. Again, on the front of her contract had the terrible terms of that car note, the lack of foresight to, actually look up the Blue Book value before you purchase a car, which for many people is the largest purchase they're ever going to make until they buy a house. If they buy a house, I don't know if this woman ever will, but she did it anyway, not looking at the terms, not looking at the interest rate. And again, the smoke detector chirps are another thing that is indicative of the fact that this woman was lacking in intelligence. But if you guys will recall, we actually had another video that we did way back when on a story about a girl who during a track meet ended up striking another runner with a baton. Again, it was all on video. It was an absolutely horrific scene, but that girl tried to play the victim, and we actually dug up, because you guys detected the smoke detector chirp in the local news segment, the full 12-minute interview that she did. And what we discovered in that particular interview is not 1, not 2, not even 3, but 4 smoke detector chirps going off. And again, you could tell by the frequency and the disparity in the volume of these particular chirps throughout the course of this interview. Now, of course, this was particularly funny because she was trying to make the case that she's not ghetto, she's not ratchet, she's not hood, and in fact, she's the victim. But while she was saying those things, probably the most ghetto thing that you could possibly have go off in your house actually went off, which is, of course, that ceiling bird.
So just people making, just off of a 9-second video, they're assuming my character, calling me ghetto, racist slurs.
And yeah, the question I have for Mr. Sociologist, who says that this is a response to trauma, is shouldn't we hear the smoke detector chirps in the victim's household rather than the perpetrator's household in this particular instance? Are we really going to say that this girl and her family have all experienced intergenerational trauma, and that's the reason why that you have the chirping go off?
In circumstances where there are continual stressors that they can identify, they are releasing that on a loop. They're releasing it too frequently, and this overwhelms the brain and dysregulates its traditional functions because it's a very delicately balanced system. Now, there are countless studies, many of which I draw on for my own research, that link the lived experience of low income or impoverished socioeconomic status with deviations in longitudinal adolescent neurological development, which is just adolescent neurological development over time, and well into adulthood. And I just want to make this clear, like, I'm focusing on what's going on with the brain and specifically the prefrontal cortex, but this is not limited exclusively to the prefrontal cortex. This affects the entire brain. This also affects the entire body. And there are many circumstances in which we can identify those, but we're focusing specifically on the fire alarm. And I think by now you can see where I'm going with this.
Or maybe are we going to say that quite possibly she is not the most intelligent person, her family not very intelligent, because you know what? They decided to let her do this interview even though she was caught dead to rights on video striking another person. She thought she was going to win people over by crying and playing the victim in this particular case, when obviously we could see the video. And by the way, if somebody's passing you in a track meet and you physically assault them, you're clearly going to get disqualified for that physical assault. So she lacked the foresight in order to see that, much in the same way that her family is lacking the foresight in order to get a 9-volt battery to change their damn smoke detectors. I mean, again, 4 chirps in this particular instance, absolute madness, but we're supposed to believe, according to the sociologists, and by the way, the comments on this TikTok video, overwhelmingly positive, and oh my god, I learned so much from you, are due to the fact that she is the victim of society, and that victimization damaged her brain. Maybe the brains aren't functioning the way that they should be in the first place. Maybe we really need to actually shame this kind of behavior, because typically the best way humanly possible, in my opinion, to get people to change a behavior is to point it out and mock it and laugh at it, because yes, it needs to be shamed in order to be corrected, rather than having somebody in a very academic way explain away this piss poor behavior, explain away this ridiculousness that we are seeing, again, from a certain section disproportionately of the black community. And make no mistake about it, if I was at a Latino's house, if I was at a white person's house, I'm half white, half Latino, folks, and I heard that chirp and it was going on, and I realized that the person that lived there did not notice the chirp going on, they just accepted it as reality, I would name and shame them as well. I would definitely embarrass them, because what they're doing is in fact embarrassing, and yes, they deserve the consequences of public shaming, because that is the thing that will correct behavior.
Wrapping it up nicely together in the dying fire alarm, if we can start to understand that the lived experience of low income or impoverished socioeconomic statuses can dysregulate the prefrontal cortex such that the simple task of replacing the fire alarm is made difficult, then we can also start to recognize that living with fire alarms that beep and beep and beep until they die is going to be a more common occurrence in places where people of those socioeconomic statuses are concentrated. And from there, it's as simple as subconsciously connecting the two in our brains without ever realizing it, although often alluding to it.
We should not in any way, shape, or form pretend that this is the consequence of victimization, that these people are disabled, that somehow, in some way, they're actually beeping out as a cry for help, a chirp for help, if you will, because that doesn't help anybody. That doesn't actually change the facts on the ground. And I got news for you. Carbon monoxide detectors and smoke detectors actually serve an important function, and not having them work in your homes because they're constantly chirping, no, not good. Also, in addition to that, there's a lot of people who are under the misperception, and I've heard this explanation a number of times in my comments, that the chirping indicates that it's working, even though it definitely 100% indicates that you need to change the battery. It is to signal you, it is to annoy you. So yeah, maybe some education needs to be made available to the public so people can understand that this is not a good outcome. This is not a good result. Again, I'm somebody who's known black people. I live in New York City. I know people from every kind of demographic. I've been over their houses. I've never once heard that noise. Never once, until it was on the internet. And when people were saying that it was a black stereotype, having not experienced it with any black person I've ever interacted with in real life, I was thinking, no, that's not real. That's not a thing. But as I progress through the internet.com and we go into these ridiculous, absurd cases, we hear this time and time again. And again, the embarrassing thing about this is that this sociology guy, probably pretty intelligent. Again, it sounds pretty educated, uses a lot of big fancy words. The local news interviewer that interviewed that girl, probably intelligent to be a local news reporter, at least to some degree. And of course, the More Perfect Union guy, again, some level of intelligence, probably a wealthy progressive that grew up with everything handed to him. And none of these people are willing to tell the truth to the people who have the chirping going on, in the same way that random black people who host shows have no problem doing it.
I went to Alabama, Oregon, A&M, Clemson, and then I said Oregon already. Texas A&M.
Hey, bro, real quick. I'm gonna need you to break the stereotype and put a battery in your smoke detector. Yeah. I'm gonna need you to break that stereotype, bro.
I heard it in the beginning. I was like,
me too.
Who's that? And I was like, oh, it's his shit.
Hey, you know what's crazy, bro? That motherfucker been for like 2 weeks now, and I've been meaning to change it, but hey.
Yeah, you need to break that stereotype, bro.
Hey, going to 2026, hey, we putting the batteries in.
Yeah, put that battery in there. Sorry, I had to say that. I just want to say that.
Hey, that's funny you said that because my girl been telling me to change it.
And honestly, even though a lot of people are going to interpret this as me going after the black community or something of the sort, I genuinely appreciate when people actually tell people the truth. And oftentimes, even though, again, there is a little bit of a culture of denial on certain things among the black community, some things more than others, the people who tell the truth straight up about issues like this, that name and shame the individuals that allow this to go on, they happen to be other black people. They do not appreciate being pandered to in this way. They don't need somebody who's hyper educated to lecture society about how we should just take these chirps, how we should just basically enjoy it. And again, maybe the reason why this becomes so prevalent in terms of like a stereotype in recent years is because of all the remote work. But yeah, you're not actually helping these people by excusing this kind of behavior. And trust me, the people, when they see my videos, when they see me say, hey, look, I can hear the chirps and I put the detectors on screen, that maybe will give them pause to go to the store and get a 9-volt battery. Also, in addition to that, can we stop pretending that absolutely everything is unaffordable? The 9-volt battery is not that expensive. I just did a quick lookup of 9-volt batteries at Dollar General, which, by the way, if you're living in a real poor area, you likely have Dollar General or Dollar Tree near you. And guess what? Under $7 for Energizer 9-volt batteries, and you get 2 of them in there. The idea that the girl who lives in the household, again with 4 of the smoke detectors beeping, that the family doesn't have $14, you can't get that over the course of months, because by the way, these detectors go off for months before they actually eventually die. Absurd, insane, asinine. We stop pretending that American poverty is the equivalent to third world poverty. Again, you should be able to afford a 9-volt battery, even if you're below the poverty line in the United States of America. In fact, if you were out on the streets begging for money, you would get $7 within an hour or two. Let's be perfectly honest about this. Stop making excuses. We don't need a damn dissertation on why black people or poor people, which is what he's trying to say, although his commenters acknowledge, and part of it he acknowledges there's a racial component to this, don't change their battery. What we need to do is say, hey, change your battery. Again, be like the black podcaster when you're interviewing the guests and you're saying, bro, change your smoke detector battery, fix that thing, acknowledge that it's happening. What the hell is wrong with you? But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Am I being ridiculous? Am I focusing way too much on this? Or does this actually need to be highlighted because it's such an absurdity, because it's such a simple fix? And by the way, the risk of not having a working smoke alarm or carbon monoxide alarm is so much more significant to the cost of putting in the damn battery that yes, my level of anger and my level of shame is definitely 100% warranted. Again, all your thoughts down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the smoke detector madness. Till next time.